Oh, we're now being recorded. All right, I'll be chill. Okay, so I'm a member and organizer, as Brett mentioned, at UAW 4121, which is at the University of Washington, 3 locations in Seattle, Tacoma, and Bothell. So this is a local of more than 6,000 graduate and undergraduate academic student employees and postdocs at the UW. So during this sort of teach-in, I'm going to be breaking down a campaign that we've been developing at UW for appointment extensions, and in particular focusing on the ways that we've been confronting multiple levels of decision makers, pursuing both short and long-term goals, and finally using these issues and organizing to build stronger organization amongst grads and postdocs, building stronger solidarity, stronger class consciousness, and so on. So as Brett mentioned, I'll leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end. And I am going to fully ignore the chat or I will become far too distracted. So I'm happy to answer any questions y'all have at the end. So in really broad strokes, the campaign we're working on is built around thinking both about the immediate term, so right now, as well as the coming summer quarter in particular, but also looking into next year and thinking about what the economy is going to look like once this pandemic is over. So especially at the forefront of all of this organizing are international students and scholars, parents, and others who are most directly impacted and facing a lot of exacerbated vulnerability right now. And we're obviously going to be facing a lot of pushback from admin in the near future over money. So we're working right now to get in the best position possible to be able to really decisively reject austerity narratives that have already started coming up and that we in this group have talked about quite a bit. And to instead really work towards building the kind of power that we need to win structural changes for equity and for economic security. Obviously that's a lot of work and it's going to take a really significant redistribution of wealth because the budgets at all levels before this pandemic even started already didn't prioritize us, whether at the university level, at the city level, at the federal level. So we were already up against this without the pandemic, and now it's increasingly difficult. So that's one of the reasons that we've been really thinking about how to build this multi-stage, multi-level campaign, because it is going to take so much work. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is going to be in the context of having a union. And I know a lot of folks in this group already either don't have a union or are not recognized. I think a lot of the basic principles and a lot of strategies I'll go through can translate to these other contexts as well. And I'll try to flag some of that throughout. And I'm also, again, happy to answer questions. So we know that actually winning appointment extensions for everyone is going to be a really big push. And it's going to take a lot of work to make it happen. So we've been implementing tactics at multiple levels and timelines targeted at various different decision makers in order to build as much power and momentum as possible, both now and going forward. So I'm going to focus on a few different sort of levers of power that we've been exercising. Coalition bargaining with other UW workers, departmental organizing, petition organizing, political action, and contract enforcement. So I'm going to primarily focus on the issue of appointment extension, but I'm also going to flag as we go through other issues that we've been addressing through these different levers, because ultimately they're all pretty interconnected. Okay, so to jump right in and start with coalition bargaining. So we've been a part of a coalition of unions at the University of Washington for a while. This group includes frontline custodial and maintenance workers, nurses, medical residents, as well as radio workers and some various different staff on campus. And so this is a large group, a pretty well-developed group, which is really exciting. In early March, as soon as some of the changes because of COVID started taking place at UW, as a coalition, we demanded to bargain with the university administration over the impacts to our work because of the crisis. Through that work, this has already resulted in improvements to things like paid leave, as well as a slate of issues that are really important for the frontline workers, like protective equipment and hazard pay, that kind of thing. And this is all really ongoing. And several weeks ago, we used this demand that had already been made to bargain over impacts to specifically demand with the administration to bargain over appointment extensions for our folks. So that bargaining is going to be starting next week. They finally got back to us with dates as a result of a lot of the other organizing that I'll go through. And we expect that with any kind of bargaining, that what administration is going to do is do whatever they can to stall, and they're very likely to just sort of like throw a bunch of austerity type talking points at us. So that's why we're not relying on bargaining by itself. By itself, it can take a really long time, and without additional momentum that's really being driven by action around and outside of the bargaining, administration can just stall forever, and can really effectively sort of yield these austerity types of arguments. But at the same time, if we do it well, bargaining can really help ensure that we're enshrining in an enforceable way structural improvements that are going to be really important. So again, I know that a lot of y'all, this specific route of bargaining might not be currently an option, but I think that even if you don't have a union, making connections with other workforces at your university can be really powerful, and can be really effective for both winning on common issues that you have as a group, as well as for supporting each other's specific needs and building more momentum and more power around those specific needs. So that's really briefly coalition bargaining. Next, I want to talk about organizing around a petition that we're moving right now. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time going into some of the details on this. So like a lot of y'all, we have a petition that we're organizing around that calls for automatic appointment extensions through the end of the summer, as well as for the university to approve any request for a 1-year extension after that. So this is really coming out of our International Solidarity Working Group, where a lot of folks were facing their appointments immediately ending or coming up soon, and facing pretty serious questions and vulnerabilities around potentially being deported if they didn't get an extension or didn't get visa renewals because of an extension. So we have most of our organizing around this petition is really coordinated by a working group of about 8 people who regularly turn out. And this group is really bottom lining the ongoing work to turn folks out and participate on this petition. And we have a goal of getting a majority of all of our workers, so all academic student employees and all postdocs, signed on before bargaining starts. So coming up very soon. So this working group meets every week to really systematically assess what our participation is looking like across all of our departments. So we have a spreadsheet that basically breaks down every single department and looks at how many people have signed on to the petition in each department out of how many people are in that department. And in places where we have active organizers, their names are also listed in each department. So among the working group, the folks who are regularly attending, we each have ownership over some set of departments. So we'll each be reaching out to like 8 departments, organizers, to talk to them about turning out more folks in their areas. So we're not ourselves doing every single act of turning someone out on the petition. We're instead coordinating across a much larger swath of people to really branch that out. And during our weekly meetings, we strategize ways to be reaching out to folks in departments where participation is still kind of low. Maybe it's because there's someone we haven't gotten in contact with yet, or maybe it's because we just don't have an active organizer right now and need to try to figure out someone who could be activated and could start working on this. And we also talk about what's working well. That group has also been holding multiple phone banks every week. And today on May Day, we're holding a day of action of a full day of phone banks that we've turned out some of our departmental organizers to call folks in their departments. And this is really directed at calling members and calling people who have not signed on yet to really drum that up and get us in a good place going into bargaining next week. And the way, if folks have not already done sort of phone banking remotely, the way that we do it is we schedule a Zoom meeting, and then right at the beginning we'll do like a 5 to 10 minute training going through the script, and then also helping people know how to sort of fill out and keep track of the calls that they're making, so we can keep really good track. And then we all stay on the Zoom during the phoning, but we go on mute. And then we can use the chat to talk to each other, sort of replicating what you would do in like an in-person phone bank. If we have questions, if weird stuff comes up, if really cool conversations happening. And then we do the phoning for a while, and then 10 minutes before the phoning shift ends, we'll all come back together on the Zoom and debrief how things went. If any hard questions came up that we need to troubleshoot, if there's anything about the script that's not working very well, if there are things that are working really well, and that kind of thing. And so through all of this work in the past few weeks, we've been able to double the number of signatures, which is really exciting. And I think the key thing that we have learned, and I say learned in a way that's, it's not new information, but it's reinforcing information we already knew, is that in departments where someone is organizing around this and turning people out actively, we're doing great. In departments where we don't have someone actively organizing, participation is not very high. Which I think just, it doesn't speak to a lack of interest in those places. It just speaks to the need to have folks that people know talking to them, and also speaks to just the reality that people are very likely to sort of ignore things or not prioritize things if they don't get a personal contact from someone they know telling them this actually is really important and you can make a difference here. And so for this kind of really systematic organizing that we're doing, having a really good list has been vitally important. So a really good list of who's in each department, how many people are in each department, and what their phone numbers are so we can call them. And as a unionized workforce, we obviously have some pretty established ways for getting regularly updated lists from the university of everyone who's included in the bargaining unit. But obviously, if you don't have a union, that's a lot less likely. But you can often mine lists from directories that you have available online, department contacts, just sort of like figuring out every department contact that you know and that the friends that you have know. You can also just get friendly department administrators to sort of give you lists. We've done that in other cases. So there are still ways to get good information about who people are and how you can get in touch with them. But it does take a little bit more work on the front end. But that is just like vitally important and very helpful. And so organizing around this petition, I want to sort of bring out a few reasons that this has been so important. First, and probably most obviously, it's helping build power and a clear, united support around the issue itself, which is going to be really important for moving administration when we go into bargaining. Because if they think that not that many people care about it, or it's just sort of something that like the 5 people on the bargaining table care about, then they're going to be a lot less likely to move quickly or move at all. And then second, and sort of like more structurally and more thinking about our organization in general, it's a great way to develop new leaders and to help new organizers really hone their organizing skills, using a really low risk ask to go out and talk to people in their departments and really gain those kinds of skills, gain those kinds of the kind of confidence that you only get by practicing organizing. So that's also really important as just building leadership. And then finally, also very structurally, this petition is also helping us assess on the big picture and in really concrete terms where we have strong organization already and where we don't. So in places where the petition has really low participation, as I mentioned earlier, we know we need to do more work to identify organizers and to start building better networks. And where it's doing really well, we know we've already got a pretty established, pretty effective organizing network. So I think this is also, this last reason is also why we're letting obviously anybody who wants to sign on to the petition, but our working group is primarily focused on analyzing and organizing participation by our members, so by ASEs and by postdocs, because part of the objective here really is to be able to build our community and build our network, thinking about how much that's going to be important going forward into the post-pandemic world and post-pandemic economy. So that's the petition. And then another sort of lever that we're using is departmental organizing, so specific departments. And the primary purpose of that kind of work is, first of all, to ensure immediate support for people who need it most urgently. So for instance, we've had a couple of international postdocs whose appointments are ending like very soon. And so their visa grace period would be about to start quite soon, but without any reliable ways to travel back to their home country or out of the United States at all, they would face exacerbated risk of deportation. So in those cases where folks' appointments were ending very soon, we want to be able to make sure that we're providing immediate support. And then the second purpose of departmental organizing is to provide examples for when we go into bargaining of departments that are already doing the kinds of things that we're going to be demanding, which will help us increase pressure on central administration to make the extensions for everybody. And all of this, I'll also mention that all of this organizing is being coordinated with our sort of bigger picture organizing and demands to make sure that it's all sort of moving in the same direction. So to start then with sort of I guess the first point, in late March, our International Solidarity Working Group pulled together a list of every grad student or postdoc whose appointment would be ending within about 3 months. And then they phone banked that group of people to start figuring out if they had immediate needs, had immediate sort of like problems with that would be caused by their appointment ending. And as I just mentioned, a number of international students and postdocs in particular faced these imminent appointment end dates that would result in potential or exacerbated risk for deportation. And so in those cases, the International Solidarity Working Group and other organizers in the persons department have worked together to really push that department for an immediate appointment extension. And so in some of those cases, we've already won extensions or other accommodations for people facing these sort of urgent needs. So in some cases, the person's immediate supervisor has been really supportive of the extension. And we've been able to push that PI, that immediate supervisor, to keep working through the department administrators and HR to make sure that the accommodation could be made despite whatever initial bureaucratic pushback the administration gave. And that has been effective. And sometimes we've also just been able to find a creative solution, like just changing the person to a different job title that has similar responsibilities, but that doesn't have the same sort of like appointment clock ending that was causing the problems. So those sort of like case-by-case creative solutions have worked in some cases to help provide immediate need. And in addition to that, we're also organizing in some departments to push chairs to agree to appointment extensions or other flexibility on like degree progress timelines right now. Again, to help not to sort of like fragment the work that we're doing, but to help push bargaining forward by being able to point to examples of this already happening. And so far, a number of departments have already successfully won accommodations for academic timelines or some emergency funding or some small stipends, which obviously none of this departmental organizing, like anything else I'm going to go through, is enough by itself to provide the kind of economic security and the kind of equity that we really need. But all of these pieces, when fit together, end up being fairly effective at pushing for those more systemic changes. Okay, so that's departmental organizing in brief. Moving on then to political action. So everything that I've talked about so far obviously costs money, and that's going to be the university's main talking point as to why they can't do it, is that it costs too much money. So we really need to be able to also generate a lot of revenue and a lot of like pretty significant redistribution of wealth to make all of this like a lot more effective and a lot more possible. So, and this is in particular really important because, for instance, international students aren't eligible for the CARES Act funding. And most of us are not eligible for unemployment that the state or federal government are putting together because we're students or we're international or we're on fixed term appointments. And these are some of obviously the most vulnerable groups. So a couple things that we've been doing to politically push for more funding for higher ed and for just generally creating economic security for folks. One sort of vehicle for this is we've been really involved in the Tax Amazon campaign here in Seattle. It's not explicitly related to appointment security, but it is really important for general economic security. This campaign would tax big businesses in Seattle in order to fund social housing and a Green New Deal. This is an especially big deal in Washington state because we have a very regressive tax structure where there's just no income tax at all. And so that's, Amazon has just been getting away with not a lot of not putting basically anything into the economy for a long time. And it's even been subsidized by us. This would tax Amazon as well as other very, very large businesses to fund these important measures. And with that campaign, we've some of our members have been organizing to support the rent strike that's happening in Seattle today, and we've also successfully organized for and won rent freezes and eviction moratoriums through this coalition that apply to the entire state. Members have been joining weekly phone banks to help with that campaign. And then the other really big political piece here is that we've also been pushing Congress to provide increased funding to higher education. Our union is working with a couple of other academic unions that are affiliated with UAW to push Congress for increased funding for research and for higher ed in ways that would apply to international workers and that would go directly to workers and not to central administration. So we have each of our executive leadership groups has sent letters directly to our congressional representatives. We also all have letter writing campaigns that members are engaging in to directly write to whatever representative they have in Congress. And because many of our members live in Pramila Jayapal's district in Seattle, and she's already amazing and doing really great things, and we have a great relationship with her, we're also focusing on specifically reaching out to members who live in districts where the representatives might not be totally there yet, but that we think could be moved on this issue. And so this has also been really important, not just because it is important and we need this to happen, but because when we're having conversations with members about the petition, often people will ask, but where's the money going to come for this? And we can pretty easily say, well, we've got this other campaign and it's really important that you participate in that as well. And going into bargaining, we'll also be able to, very reliably and hopefully impactfully be able to say, we're pushing for more funding for you to be able to make this even more doable for yourselves. So that can really help undermine some of the austerity arguments we know are going to be coming. We can even say, what are you doing to request more funding from the government to support these really important causes and to make sure that we can prioritize the people who are making the university run in the first place. So that's a bit on political action. And then finally, contract enforcement. So this section is obviously the one that applies least to non-unionized folks or folks whose unions aren't recognized. So I'm just going to try to buzz through it pretty quickly. But our current contracts assure appointment security, layoff protections, workload protections, and another of really important issues relevant to appointments and appointment extension. And near the end of winter quarter, when the shelter-in-place orders first took effect in Washington, a number of departments threatened to change people's appointments for spring to positions that offered less compensation. Some of our hourly workers were told that since they wouldn't be able to complete their hours online, that they just wouldn't be paid for those hours. So by working with our contract enforcement working group, people were able to get clarity on their rights in order to really effectively enforce those contract terms in their departments. And so even for folks whose hours were cut or whose job duties had to change, everyone who we worked with was able to receive commensurate compensation for what they'd been expecting. And in one department, people had been forced to work over their normal hours, and we were able to make sure that they were paid extra for those additional hours. And we've also successfully used the contract as a tool for ensuring that everyone who isn't doing research directly related to COVID is able to work remotely, even despite some departments saying that people would need to come to campus. We've also been able to ensure that people are receiving the materials and services that they need to work at home at no personal cost. So things like Wi-Fi hotspots and Ethernet. So that's just a quick run through of some of the contract enforcement work too. So I think one key takeaway from all of this that I'd like to impress is that it is really important to figure out ways to talk in person to as many people as possible. For instance, here in the last 4 weeks, we've phoned thousands of people through group phone banks for a lot of various different causes, including the petition, but also including signing up for membership and a number of other important things. And then the other sort of group of takeaways is I think that using these kind of multiple levers of power simultaneously is really key for building the deep grassroots power it's going to take to win structural changes, both right now and thinking into next year, thinking into the post-pandemic economy. This helps us with a lot of things. It helps minimize the blame throwing that we experience a lot between decision makers. For instance, the university saying, we'd love to help, but Congress doesn't give us enough money. That kind of stuff comes up a lot, and we can really minimize that by using multiple tactics at the same time. It also helps build momentum towards actually winning the concrete aims that we have when we're coming at it from multiple directions at the same time. And then finally, and probably the most important, is that it really helps build and strengthen our own internal organizing networks so that when we're moving into the future with the kind of solid foundation it really is going to take to be able to not only survive the post-COVID economy, but also improve our lives actively. Because if we don't build that kind of foundation right now, we're going to just be totally fucked then. And it's going to be way too easy to divide us, way too easy to confuse us really effectively, or to manipulate the conversation, to sell an austerity mindset, that kind of thing. If we don't already have a really firm, solid foundation of solidarity and just trust with each other. So those are some of the really important reasons to be thinking not just about one tactic for moving an agenda, but thinking about a lot of different levers that are aimed at different decision makers, thinking about different timelines, and using different strategies to figure out what's going to be the most effective.
Thank you. Wow, Sam, that's really inspirational work that you and your comrades at the University of Washington are doing. So much to really chew on and pick up on. So I guess we can start the Q&A session now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I will be, Catherine has made the comment, please put your name down in the chat to be put on Stack. I'll be keeping Stack and helping to, and if you have a question that you want to ask, but you don't want to be on camera, ask it in the chat and I'll present it for you. I'll put myself on Stack just to get the ball rolling and give people a chance to think a little bit more. I really appreciated how you talked about in the petitioning campaign that you have about all of the really nitty-gritty details of what that looks like, and specifically the numbers of people that are involved in that. You said that there's a working group of 8 people that bottom lines that. And I'm just curious, because this is such a multi-pronged approach, and the University of Washington is such a large institution, I'm just curious if you could speak a little bit more to numbers in the key working groups, the number of people that are bottom lining things, and then how you're coordinating and distributing the labor that actually makes these broad-fronted campaigns possible.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think sort of implicit in it is that it takes a lot of people to make this work, which I think is absolutely true. Not only because there are just only so many hours in the day, but also because burnout is real. And if we're expecting just a small number of people to do everything, they'll absolutely get burned out really quickly. So I think that really core to not only just strategically being the most effective we can be, but also just taking care of each other, is that we have a very wide distribution of labor, sort of bottom lining all of this, or grounding all of this. So we have, in most departments, we have active organizers or stewards whose general primary responsibilities are for reaching out to the other people in their departments. And in most cases, the ideal that we shoot for is that each organizer have about like 25 people that they think of themselves as being responsible for reaching out to. And so when we have things like a petition or like needing to turn out to an action or something like that, it's generally the department organizers who are reaching out to their folks and turning them out. So it makes it a pretty manageable amount of work. Some folks who are also are doing that and are also involved in working groups. Some people are just involved in working groups. And we have working groups on a number of different issues. Most of these groups have between 5 and 10 people who regularly participate. So that's true, obviously, of the work group that's bottom lining the appointment petition. Our International Solidarity Working Group, I think, has probably a really similar number, 7 or 8 people who regularly participate. And like I mentioned, some of those folks are also doing organizing in their own departments. Some of them are primarily focused just on sort of coordinating around that issue. But because we're able to pretty effectively communicate with the network of folks that we already have engaged, then that really distributes the work in a way that's manageable and isn't putting the burden just on a small core of people.
Thank you.
I had a question. You mentioned in one of the lines that the university uses is the fact that Congress is not helping. What are the effective ways to actually counter that discourse that you've found successful?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think, and sometimes it's Congress, sometimes it's the state, because we're a public institution. I think one of the effective ways, which is also just like effective in organizing too, and one-to-one organizing, is just to ask them to help, like ask them to jointly go to Congress or go to the state to lobby together for more funding. If they take us up on that, then great. Maybe we will actually be able to work together in a way that's productive. Often they sort of flirt around it, but don't necessarily take us up on it, which is frustrating on the one hand, but it also totally disables that talking point. Like they can't very effectively complain about not getting a lot of funding if they've demonstrated that they're not willing to help ask for it. So that's one way that I can immediately think of. And I think just the fact that we're like mobilizing as many members as possible to be writing to Congress too helps demonstrate that we are taking it seriously, that we need to get more revenue for this, and that we want to be able to figure out how to redistribute the wealth in a way that's really important to prioritizing our folks. So showing the ways that we are taking action, asking them to take action as well, are two ways that I can think of.
Thanks, Mohan. Thanks, Sam. Katrin.
I just had, a quick question about, I was interested in the strategy of the tax. And so could you speak a little bit about the kind of framing that you've been doing around that, like specific campaign, like how's the specific campaign sort of being implemented, and what other, have you identified other ways in which you can sort of rope in that form of redistribution within the city or the state?
Yeah, totally. So the sort of key framing around that is that it's a campaign to tax the top 2% of businesses, so really, really high earning businesses, to support social affordable housing and Green New Deal. Affordable housing in Seattle, like in many places represented here, is a huge problem. And we have, I think, the third largest homeless population in the country, because sort of the income inequality in Seattle is just out of control because there is no income tax. And we have a lot of tech workers who make lots and lots and lots of money, and a lot who don't. But so that's the basic framing, is we're taxing the top 2% of businesses to fund social affordable housing for working people and homeless folks, of course, and a Green New Deal. And these are issues that is not difficult to get grad students and postdocs on board with. So it's been very easy to sort of integrate interested folks into that campaign. And it's also been a great opportunity to, again, be building coalition and building community outside of just our immediate network in UW, but thinking more broadly about the city and about the state. And a lot of the work there is very, very people-driven. It's very like democratic and building on a lot of momentum from a lot of different people. Before the shutdown happened, there were a number of town halls to start off, to really start off the campaign with like a ton of folks coming out and really getting active. And now there are weekly phone banks where we're pushing for the initiative, or we're pushing for this to be a ballot initiative in an upcoming election. So that's where a lot of the focus is. I know there's a bunch of actions going on today as well to build for this. And previous campaigns in the city, we had a head tax, which would be a tax, because we can't have an income tax without changing the Constitution. This would have helped a bit tax big businesses to support these issues. And it was passed unanimously by City Council, and then some really frustrating counter organizing from the business community pushed that back, and so that was repealed. So this is sort of the next stage. Prior to that, we were also successful in winning a $15 minimum wage in Seattle, which was really, really helpful and really critical. We then won it at UW as well. So those are a few things that immediately come to mind.
I'd particularly like to invite folks that are maybe in unions already or at public institutions to maybe compare their experiences with the work that Sam and her comrades have been doing at the University of Washington. Perhaps there are interesting sort of, points of comparison, or I was about to say synergy, but I'll just say it, it's a horrible word. Overlap, we'll go with that. Andy T, please.
Yeah, I really appreciate everything that Sam said, and I can't stress hard enough the importance of like a phone tree, and just like having a list of who are the people in your department, how to get a hold of them, and how to communicate amongst each other. So for those of you that are not in collective bargaining, that don't have a union, numbers always matter. It doesn't matter how great of an argument you have. What matters is how many people are in the room. So that's one mantra that I learned through my union at U of M, is that the problem with most higher ed professionals is we're all under the presumption that having a really good argument, we can philosophically best our opponent in a debate. No, it's not. Sure, you need that. That's the thing that's easy for us to come up with. The harder thing is the list of people who will show up, who will commit to things. And along those lines, one of the things that's been really beneficial to us in Leo is having coalitions with our students, because I'm contingent faculty, I'm the least, important person in the hierarchy. My students, who I've taught thousands of them at U of M now, have much more power and say than I do. So having the phone list for your own members and your own coworkers, but also being able to identify student leaders and students, because the mantra is our working conditions are their learning conditions. And if they are cutting classes, if they're raising enrollment, that hurts their experience.
Thanks for adding that into the mix. Sam, did you want to respond quickly before, I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher your name, Shobhan speaks?
I'd love to hear more from other folks. I agree with pretty much everything Andy just said.
Awesome. Okay, Shobhan, sorry for butchering your name.
That's okay. It's Siobhan.
Siobhan, thank you.
No worries. Yeah, I was just going to reiterate what Andy said about student support when we were unionizing, and you know, once we had taken a strike authorization vote, and we were coming very, very close to striking during the negotiation process. The work of this group on campus called Student Worker Solidarity. It's a Barnard and Columbia group. It was really, really instrumental. Ultimately, you know, they're the ones paying the tuition, and you know, we're fortunate that SWS has reached out to in the past few weeks, saying, you know, is there any way we can be of support? I've been feeling personally so just almost paralyzed that I've almost forgotten some of these really important tools at our disposal. Sam, I would just want to thank you for reminding us of, you know, the power that we have to organize collectively. And I also want to reiterate what you said about having a good argument. Yeah, that's ultimately the more important thing. Yeah.
Thanks, Shobhan. Sam, did you want to pick up on either of the points?
Sure. Yeah. I think I couldn't agree more that the way we most effectively move our administrations is not through having the more accurate or more righteous argument, even though that is important and is very helpful for things like publicity campaigns and other communications. But at the end of the day, we can have the best argument in the world, and if they feel like they can get away with stalling, they absolutely will. So I think that thinking about, we can often sort of think of things like petitions as being sort of a little bit like a throwaway or like not that impactful. But when what we're doing is using the petition to demonstrate that there is widespread, deep support for something, then that can help. It's not going to do everything by itself, but that can be very helpful for pushing administration to do the kinds of things our very important arguments are saying they ought to do, because it forces them past the initial sort of starting point of thinking, well, we can just stall forever and they'll eventually get tired and go away, or not enough people care about this, so we can just like weather it for a month and then they'll go away. So yeah, I would just reiterate both of the previous folks for emphasizing that.
I'll just add, emphasize something that you said earlier, the use of petitioning as a way to, as an organizing tool, basically. So it's one outward facing towards the administration or whoever it is that you are petitioning or asking something for. Bethany, we've got you on stack. And also primarily, it seems like, about building those lists, gathering that information, building support. I hope that I am not. Okay, sorry, had a little internet issue there. So just wanted to reiterate that point that you made earlier. And so many of, and for those that are not unionized, that are on the call, many of us are building those petitions and sending them around and gathering support from alumni, from students, you know, staff, I mean, all different constituencies. And those can be really important tools for also organizing ourselves, right? And building the real capacity, which comes in the number of people that you have, basically, which I think Andy T, Sam, and Shobhan have made abundantly clear. Bethany, please.
Thank you all so much. This is so encouraging to hear. This may be a question that's better addressed in the institutionally specific groups, so let me know if that's the case. I'm just really stumped by the novel organizing environment I'm finding myself in here, where fellow faculty identify with the administrators because they are faculty, and identify with the institution, and are really cut off from any larger identification with the profession as a whole. They're, by and large, it's not a graduate institution, so they can't with there's not really much contingent labor, although there's more than people think. So they're very, the faculty itself, outside of maybe 100 people, really identify with administrators and with the institution, and even the alumni. The students themselves certainly don't identify as workers. It's overwhelmingly, I'm having a really hard time figuring out how to take models that, are familiar to me from labor organizing in any other kind of setting and make them legible in this situation. I'm wondering if other people have had experience in private institutions without graduate students getting traction with fellow faculty. Thank you.
So I obviously can't speak to that from the perspective of faculty, but I will sympathize that I think that is a mindset that is also shared among a lot of grad students and a lot of postdocs. It's probably less entrenched than it might be by the time you get to faculty position. But I would say one of our immediate challenges is that so many of our folks either just automatically trust administration to have their backs and to be their friend, or just like don't even think of themselves as workers at all. So I don't have any like easy or like super automatic answers to that, but I think that the sort of mantra of that I'm going to forget now because my brain is soup, of action speaking louder than words, there it is often what does the trick. So in a lot of cases, people have been activated simply by seeing for themselves what happens when we take something to administration and they're like, no, fuck you, go away. Seeing like how much work it can take to push for a basic change to be made, that's really important to us. And that seems like it wouldn't really put them out very much at all, but that they put up a huge fight too. Just like concretely going through those experiences can be very like mind altering, mind shaping in important ways. But the trick is to get to that stage, which can be pretty difficult.
Yeah, that's valuable. The kind of the movement itself as educative, the experience. Catherine, you wanted to chime in, and then I think we'll have to wrap.
Yeah, I guess just sort of building off of what Sam and Brett were just saying, currently Columbia University is graduate students are on strike at the Graduate School for Arts and Sciences. And so one of the things we found useful in response to, say, the administration intimidating graduate students by reaching out via email, threatening with docking pay, has been that some faculty have responded. And so we've used that. We've circulated those emails among our faculty who are more paralyzed and not as willing to respond, to sort of create peer pressure. And I think just like those specific strategies of how showing those examples and seeing how it can be done can be incorporated. But I was just going to say that to that point, also one of the biggest challenges I feel in terms of organizing and creating that solidarity between, across ranks has been something that at this organization, that's, what sort of like we're super interested in doing. And so while we were talking, also Risa Lieberwitz, who's a professor at the ILR school at Cornell, and with the executive director of AAUP, confirmed they're going to be doing a workshop or a teach-in with us on May 15th about this topic precisely, right? So about good ways to organize tenured faculty. And I think that one of the main issues is going to be about that, right? How the question of how they interiorize this figure of the manager, and which is already inscribed within the law. And so how to sort of break that down is going to be one of the things we're going to be asking them to talk about. So
yeah, just to clarify there, and maybe as a way to transition into our concluding remarks, Risa Leibowitz is the general counsel to AAUP, right? And then Julie Schmidt will be joining her, I believe, and she's an executive director, member of the AAUP. Yeah, so you can look forward to that on the 15th. I guess, Sam, unless you have anything that you want to conclude with, I'll thank you personally, deeply. So many people have been sending in their thanks in the chat that you might not have been able to see while you're talking, for sharing this really, I'm obviously lost for words, so I'll just leave it there. I'm gonna end the recording here.